Let's talk about the popular novels and the important novelists of the Victorian period now. As we know that the genre called novels developed in the 18th century with the works of writers like Daniel Defoe, Richardson, Fielding, Smollett, Austen, etc. But it reached its peak during the Victorian period. The major purpose of these Victorian novelists was to entertain the new middle class and to show the contemporary society of the Victorian age through their writings. The subject matter of these novels and the characters of these novels were usually people from the lower class or people from the middle class, and they were often contrasted with the upper class landed gentry, or you can say the rich people. The fast printing and publication of these novels helped increase the growth of the readership. The major themes of these novels were mostly about women education, their progress and marriage, confinement of women, economic and social problems, poverty, etc. Now let's come to the major novelists of the Victorian era, which are important for us to know from the exam point of view. The very first novelist, who was the most popular novelist of the Victorian age, was Charles Dickens. Dickens was an English writer and social critic born in England and is known to the world for some of his best novels and best fictional characters. He is one of the greatest novelists of the Victorian era. Dickens' literary journey began with the publication of his first book of stories called The Pickwick Papers in 1836. It was a serialized publication of his stories into magazines, which means that his stories were published in the magazines at that time. He quickly became an international literary celebrity because of his sense of humor, satire, and his keen observation of the characters and society, which he showed in his writings. Some of the other notable works by Charles Dickens are Oliver Twist, Nicholas Nickleby, A Christmas Carol, Martin Chuzzlewit, Dombey and Sons, David Copperfield, Bleak House, Hard Times, Little Dorrit, A Tale of Two Cities, Great Expectations, Our Mutual Friend, and he also wrote an unfinished novel which was Edwin Drood. Now let's talk about some of his famous novels and the characters in them. Some of the famous characters created by Charles Dickens are the character of Uriah Heep, a hypocritical and cunning person in the novel David Copperfield, and then we have another character in that novel, Mr. Micawber, who is financially troubled but optimistic man. In his novel Great Expectations, we see the central character named Pip and another character named Miss Havisham, who is an overly negative, cold-hearted, old and reclusive woman, and then we have Magwitch, a convict who secretly has always helped Pip to make him a successful man. There is a Bollywood movie named Fitoor which is based on this novel, so you can watch that movie to better understand the overall plot and structure of the novel Great Expectations. Moving forward, then we have characters like Sidney Carton, a lawyer, and Charles Darnay, a French aristocrat. Lucy Manet, a beautiful and kind young woman, contrasted with Madame Defarge, a vengeful revolutionary, in his novel A Tale of Two Cities. Then there is a novel called Hard Times by Dickens, which has characters like Thomas Gradgrind, who is a utilitarian educator and does not believe in emotions, Mr. Bounderby, a self-made industrialist, and Stephen Blackpool, a mine worker and a tragic figure in this novel. This novel highlights the negative effects of industrialization in England during the Victorian era. The variety of characters that Charles Dickens has explored in his novels is beyond comparison. No other novelist has done so in his lifetime. No other novelist has invented such diversified characters like Dickens has. Second important novelist from this period is William Makepeace Thackeray. When Dickens talked about the overall general population in his novels, Thackeray talked about the society of the clubs, the drawing rooms, and the well-to-do people. One of his famous novels is Vanity Fair. The title of this novel is taken from Bunyan's religious prose narrative, The Pilgrim Progress, written in 1678 and which I discussed in the previous ages. The subtitle of this novel is A Novel Without a Hero. And in this novel, we see Thackeray's spirit of writing and his principles of art. Thackeray was a social satirist and a realist. In his novels, he attacked the snobbery, affectations, and lack of emotions in the people of upper class society. Now, let us discuss briefly the summary of his important novel Vanity Fair. The novel follows the lives of two women, Becky Sharp and Amelia Seedley. The novel explores the experiences faced by these two women, their relationships, and their struggle against the conservative English Victorian society at that time. Through his novel, Thackeray critiques the English society, moral values, and the class structure prevalent then. Out of the two protagonists, Becky Sharp is cunning, beautiful, and ambitious, anti-heroine, whereas Amelia Seedley is kind of naive and very loyal. The title of the novel suggests that superficiality of life in this city, London, and Becky symbolizes self-absorption and vanity that was prevalent in the society at that time. So Becky Sharp is the representation of the society which believed in show-off. Third important novelist of this period is George Eliot, also known as Mary Ann Evans, who was one of the famous female novelists from this time period and who initially started writing under a male pseudonym or male name, that was George Eliot, which made her famous. Where Dickens wrote about the London streets and Thackeray talked about the clubs and drawing rooms or the upper class, George Eliot mostly talked about the old-fashioned provincial life or rural life of England where she grew up during her childhood. Her works sometimes resemble that of Jane Austen, as we see a representation of men and manners in the villages and country or the town of England. Some of her most famous novels are Adam Bede, where we see characters like Adam Bede, Hetty Sorrel, Dina Morris. Another novel is The Mill on the Floss, published in 1860. In this novel, Eliot talks about themes like family, love, and social expectations. There are characters like Maggie Tulliver, Tom Tulliver, etc. Then there are the novels like Silas Marner, Romola, Felix Holt, and the radical Middlemarch, Daniel Deronda, which are also among the best novels written by George Eliot. Eliot's works champions the women's rights and women's education during the Victorian age. Her novels are full of realism and psychological insights into the human emotions and human nature. Since she started publishing with a male pseudonym, it is obvious that the Victorian society at that time was very conservative when it came to women, especially the women who were trying to make a living through writing, because writing was considered as a male arena. That is a profession which is solely made only for men. That is what they believed then. It was only later that when her novels gained popularity that George Eliot came to be recognized as a female novelist with the name Mary Ann Evans. Now let's talk about other female novelists of this age, the Brontë sisters. The three sisters named Charlotte Brontë, Emily Brontë, and Anne Brontë, who were a trio of English novelists and also poets who wrote significantly during the 19th century. Some of the famous novels by these sisters are, the first one is by Charlotte Brontë, which is Jane Eyre. She also wrote Shirley and then Villette. She also wrote poetry which was published under the pseudonym Currer Bell, which was a very gender-neutral name. Emily Brontë wrote the famous novel Wuthering Heights, which reflected the psychological insights into the minds of the characters like Heathcliff, Catherine Earnshaw, Nellie Dean, etc. Emily published her poetry also with a pseudonym Alice Bell. So she was also using a pseudonym to publish herself. Anne Brontë is the third sister who wrote the novel named Agnes Grey, which is her only novel. Out of all these three sisters and their works, the novel Jane Eyre by Charlotte Brontë and the novel Wuthering Heights by Emily Brontë are particularly famous. Then we have novelists like Elizabeth Gaskell, who wrote novels like Mary Barton in 1848 and Cranford in 1851 to 53. Then we have novelists like Thomas Hardy, who wrote popular novels like Tess of D'Urbervilles in 1891 and Far from Madding Crowd in 1874, Jude the Obscure in 1895, The Return of the Native in 1878 and The Mayor of Casterbridge in 1886. Under the Greenwood Tree in 1872 and A Pair of Blue Eyes in 1873. Robert Louis Stevenson was also one of the famous novelists of the Victorian age, who wrote an adventure novel called Treasure Island. Then he wrote another novel called Kidnapped, and the next, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So he was basically writing for the children. Then we have Wilkie Collins, who was popular for writing suspense fiction with elements of gothic in it. His famous novel is The Woman in White. And then we have The Moonstone, The Haunted Hotel. So these were some of the gothic fictions that Wilkie Collins popularized during that time. Then we have Arthur Conan Doyle, who is also counted as one of the famous Victorian novelists, who wrote a series based on famous character Sherlock Holmes, who is a detective and solves crimes. He also wrote a novel titled The Lost World based on dinosaurs, which was majorly written for children. Then we have Oscar Wilde, who was also one of the novelists of the Victorian period and who wrote the famous novel The Picture of Dorian Gray, which I will explain later when I will talk about the writers from the group of the decadent. Then we also have novelists like Rudyard Kipling, who is famous for his novel The Jungle Book. One of the interesting facts about Kipling is that he was born in Bombay and was also educated in India. So that was all about the popular novels and the famous novelists of the Victorian era. In the next video, I will talk about the famous poets and the poetry composed by them during the Victorian era. So let's move on to the next video.